Welcome back. Mr. Innocent Chukwuma is the Regional Director for West Africa Ford Foundation, and he joins us this morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
We're trying to look at how we can, of course, improve on achieving free, fair, and credible elections is what we're focusing on this morning. And we've just had INEC speak about a number of issues here, but he also did say that it is politicians who are the ones saying, well, or doubting either the credibility or the way they're managing or the confidence of INEC or the capacity of INEC to conduct elections, and he doesn't think that it's beyond politicians. Is that what you've seen from some of the research and what you've done so far?
I think the first thing to point out is that in every general election, there are 4 critical stakeholders. You have the political parties, you have the electorate, you have the electoral administration, and you have security agencies. If there is any weak link, if there is any challenge in the performance of the duties of all these stakeholders, it will impact the outcome of the election. And I agree with Mr. Uzzi. Over the last 16 to 17 years, INEC has made some progress in the organization of election. I remember in 1999 what we're dealing with is multiple voting, which they have corrected with the introduction of card readers and other. At a point, we were dealing with movement of the materials, which they have gotten better with better coordination. But the missing link now is the collection of a result. Because as we observe in Edo, elections were conducted relatively free and fair and ended early. But collation started late, and at some point they stopped it till the following day, and that was where we started having some of the challenges.
Because where is that improvement if people are still complaining that their mandate has been stolen, even up until recently?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I'm saying. Some improvements have been made, especially under the previous administration, but there are still some areas that they need to do better, which is collection of results. And this is where the same technology that helped them in accreditation of voters could have done. Because if we look at the 1993 election, what made it credible was as soon as the elections were concluded, the results were transmitted to the headquarters and tabulated. Those days they were writing it with chalks on blackboard, and people were seeing it, and all the copies that the party agents collected were authentic results, which was why. But today, we are not doing that. If you remember, I think it was the legislature that stopped the use of electronic voting and transmission. So INEC has gotten better. But then, the political parties have also improved, because as he said, today we have 2 strong national parties fielding strong candidates. So the margin of win now is coming to the wire, which is where every constituency, every polling station's result count. And where you have number of voters in the register being larger than the margin, whichever candidate or party, it calls for postponing that election until that constituency election is conducted.
But
then you find out also the non-collection of the permanent voters register has led to bloating of the voters register, because we saw in Kogi the number of registered voters were very high, but the people that actually turned up to vote were very few. So all those count. But the critical challenge I actually need us to address here is that while INEC has gotten better, political parties, in terms of building stronger parties, are getting better, though there are serious issues around internal democracy, about the emergence of candidates and all that. The security agencies have not really improved in terms of independence. And you saw it in all the security reports that were said to have been given around the election that led to the postponement. So when looking at the improvement of the election, we have to look at the role of each of these critical stakeholders and make sure that they are moving in the same direction.
And when you talk about improvement, one wonders why now we still haven't been able to go back and see how we can tweak the Electoral Act. Why is it? Doesn't it amaze you that INEC still at this time would want to base a number of election results based on those number of votes cast as against number of those who collected their PVCs. Because if you are putting it further, not remembering that a lot of people or some people didn't collect their PVC, which is a prerequisite for you to cast your ballot on the day, then it makes nonsense of the whole exercise of the PVC at the end of it all.
It still comes down to that collection. Because it's at the level of that collection that all these improvements appear to have been jettisoned. And then it comes down to the tabulation that people who are involved there, right? If you remember, even in the 2015 election, I mean, widely acknowledged to have been an improvement. It was broadcast on national television. Some returning officers couldn't even write the votes that they tabulated in their states, and they had to be told by the chairman to go back, do it better, and come back and announce. And this is on national television.
When you talk about national television, there seems to be some secrecy somewhere between when votes are over and there's a movement, transit, between taking these results to collation center and what happens. Because for so many people, they say it is then that so many magical things happen. Even for a long time, you've been following elections and observing elections. Are there suggestions we can bring to the table in trying to rejig the Electoral Act between that time when votes are over and the time we're doing collation that will help people who are already aggrieved by saying that their votes didn't count?
I think improvement of transparency in both transportation of the vote cast and in the collation center. And I tell you what, election observers busy themselves during the days observing how the elections are conducted. But as soon as the elections are over, and they are loaded into the vans of security agencies, observers cannot follow that convoy because they drive in all kinds of crazy manners that people can't follow. So between the movement of materials from the movement of materials from the polling stations to the centers where this counting starts, there's a challenge there. And also the situation where you have counting continuing in the dead of the night and at a point stopped and say, come back the following day. Who takes custody of those materials? Are independent observers allowed into that process to make sure that something untoward doesn't happen along the line?
Do you really think INEC is independent?
Well, there have been, again, improvements. If we remember when we started this process of electoral reform in 1999, INEC budget was controlled by the executive. Now it's under direct charge. Before, the appointments were done by the president alone, without, though he says, consultation with the Council of State. But the real recommendation was actually to make these to make INEC appointment subject to input of multiple stakeholders, including the executive, the legislator, and I will even suggest having a public hearing. If somebody is nominated to be a chair or commissioners, you have a public hearing where people who have interacted with these people in the past will come and testify to their integrity, because these people are not coming from the moon. People have interacted with them in their various previous engagement before their appointment. So to the extent that these multiple stakeholders, as you would expect in a democracy, are excluded from the appointment process, you will say the independence is a little suspect.
Let's bring Mark in on this. Mark, go ahead.
Well, so I was just going to ask, I mean, you found that the INEC too is always, you've talked about the weak link, but INEC is always talking about the desperation of politicians. Do you think that this, what sort of bearing would you say this has on elections?
It has a lot of bearing. You also have to look at the political economy of elections, what you actually gain in quote if you win. You basically control the state. Regulatory agencies, laws, once you are, because this is why politicians say, announce the result and let the person go to court. Because once you're an incumbent, you can practically control state institutions. Not because there are no laws, but because of the culture. They say culture is strategy and laws for breakfast. You can have all the laws in the book, but our daily subservience to authority without regard to what the law says trumps it. And people know that when they get into these positions, their lives are practically transformed overnight. And that's what informs
so it's not about
the
service.
It's clearly not much about service, which is why people are saying if we can succeed in reducing the patronage system we have in our society, where all the commanding heights of the economy, the state still have the state is the biggest player in business, in allocation of resources, and whoever controls
in all sectors,
whoever controls the state controls everything. So even INEC, security agencies and all that. Look at even the security agencies. Who appoints them? And when you have the person who appoints them being a candidate in an election... Is
there anything that INEC can do about it?
INEC has tried in the past. Mr. Uzzi talks about the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, where it tries to liaise with security agencies to ensure that they are on the same page in terms of the role. INEC has also periodically organized these forums of interacting with political parties and all that. Those can go to an extent without addressing the fundamental issue of what do people really gain when they get into this position. Is it service or lining their pocket? Which is where the anti-corruption program of the current government is important if it can be comprehensively prosecuted, so that all those loopholes that people exploit to enrich themselves will be removed. And as long as once it is done, this will not happen. Because if you look at Abuja now, not many people go to Abuja because there isn't a lot to share again. And that will tell you something about our elections.
Well, what do you say to many who have the impression that, look, INEC, or the results are always manipulated by whoever can do it better?
Well, I don't totally agree with them. Yes, there are issues around collection, but even at that collection, all the party agents are represented. And now, unlike what we have in the past, where it's only one party that has the resources to deploy agents across the polling station, we have two evenly matched and strong parties that can deploy. So if their agents who are supposed to be present when these results are counted, collected, transported, and decide to do something else, you can't blame INEC.